Man, I've got to tell you, this offseason feels different. Not in that flashy, headline-grabbing way, but in that quiet, confident way, where you can tell the team knew exactly what they were doing from start to finish. It's like everything was calculated. Every move had a purpose. And now you look at the roster and start thinking, hold on, this might actually be even better than before. I'll tell you everything in detail, but first click the like button and, if possible, comment. Go Seahawks! It's done. The Seattle Seahawks have just pulled off something that very few teams in the NFL ever managed to achieve. And that's positioning themselves not just to defend a Super Bowl title, but to actually get stronger in the process without making reckless moves, without overpaying in free agency, and without sacrificing the future of the franchise. And when you really break down everything John Schneider executed this offseason, you start to understand why there's a growing belief that Seattle didn't just have a good offseason, they may have quietly dominated it. Because while a lot of fans across the league were looking for flashy signings and headline-grabbing moves, what the Seahawks did was something much more calculated, much more sustainable, and, honestly, much more dangerous. For the rest of the NFL, they brought back the core of a championship roster. And they did it with precision, bringing back a large portion of the 18 players who were set to hit free agency from that Super Bowl winning team, which already tells you everything about the philosophy inside that front office. And when you zoom in on those returns, you start to see how important each piece really is, even the ones that don't necessarily show up on highlight reels every Sunday. Players like Josh Jones continuing as a reliable swing tackle, Chris Stoll and Brady Russell maintaining their roles, especially on special teams. These are the kinds of moves that don't trend on social media, but absolutely win you games across a long season, because depth and role execution are what sustain championship teams, not just star power. But then there's one name that deserves a deeper look, and that's Rashid Shaheed, because bringing him back might end up being one of the most impactful decisions of this entire offseason. Even if the box score watchers don't immediately understand it, this is a player who changed games in ways that stats don't always capture, especially with his explosive impact on special teams, delivering multiple touchdowns and constantly flipping field position. And there's a strong belief internally that his role in 2026 is going to expand in a way that unlocks even more of his potential. Now shifting to the defensive side of the ball, this is where things get even more interesting, because Seattle didn't just retain talent, they reinforced a system that has clearly proven it knows how to identify, develop, and maximize players better than most organizations in the league right now. And that's not speculation. That's a pattern you can clearly see, with guys like Drake Thomas, a player who was essentially overlooked, brought into Seattle, developed into a starter, and is now considered more than worth his contract. And the same philosophy shows up again when you look at the decision-making around the secondary, particularly with Josh Jobe. Instead of committing major money elsewhere, the Seahawks trusted their evaluation and development process, choosing a player who can deliver comparable production at a significantly lower cost. And that's the kind of roster management that allows a team to remain competitive year after year, instead of peaking for just one season. What stands out the most is that this defense isn't being rebuilt. It's being sustained and subtly elevated. And that's a huge difference, because maintaining a championship level defense is often harder than building one, yet Seattle has managed to keep that unit intact while still finding ways to inject upside and internal growth. And then you look at the restricted free agents, Jake Bobo, Ty Okada, and George Halani, and this is where things start to feel even more promising for the future, because internally there's a strong expectation that all three are going to take on bigger roles next season, with Okada and Halani in particular being highlighted as players ready to make significant leaps, which again reinforces that theme Seattle doesn't just find talent, they develop it, and they trust it. Holani's trajectory suggests he could push toward a much more prominent role in the backfield, potentially even approaching a lead position, while Okada's development mirrors what we've already seen from other defensive backs in this system, stepping in and producing at a level that allows the team to confidently move on from more expensive options. And that's exactly how sustainable contenders operate in today's NFL. And when you combine all of that with the new additions that were brought in, players like Emmanuel Wilson adding depth to the running game, Noah Igbinoghene bringing first-round pedigree into the cornerback room, and Rodney Thomas and Dean Anthony Bell reinforcing the safety group, you start to see the bigger picture of what Schneider was building here. Not a splashy offseason, but a strategic one, focused on competition, depth, and long-term flexibility. Because the reality is, we've seen it time and time again. Teams that win free agency in March often struggle when the season actually begins. And Seattle clearly made a conscious decision to avoid that trap, prioritizing internal growth, smart spending, and roster balance over headlines and hype. So when you step back and look at everything, the returning core, the calculated additions, the internal development pipeline, and the financial discipline to prepare for future extensions, it becomes very hard to argue that the Seahawks didn't put themselves in an elite position heading into 2026, not just to compete, but to stay on top. And that's where the real conversation begins, because if this team was already good enough to win it all, and now they've managed to keep that foundation intact while quietly improving around the edges, then the question isn't whether they did enough, it's whether the rest of the league has done enough to catch them. So, let me ask you, looking at everything the Seahawks have done so far this offseason, do you truly believe this team got better, or are there still moves you think they should have made? And here's where the conversation takes a turn that a lot of fans don't want to fully confront. Because yes, this offseason looks incredibly strong on paper, but it did come with real sacrifices, and the Seahawks absolutely made some tough decisions that are going to shape the identity of this team moving forward, especially when you start looking at the key departures that walked out the door, Kenneth. Walker is gone, and that's not a small loss. That's a player who brought explosiveness and identity to the offense. Derek Young followed Clint Kubiak to Las Vegas. Kobe Bryant earned himself a payday in Chicago. Boy Mayfield cashed in with Cincinnati. And Rick Woolen also moved on after putting himself in position to secure a major contract. And when you list those names out like that, it's impossible to pretend. This team didn't lose real talent. But this is exactly where John Schneider's philosophy becomes crystal clear. Because instead of trying to keep everyone and blowing up the salary cap, the Seahawks made calculated decisions on who to pay and who to replace. And more importantly, they trusted their system to fill those gaps internally or at a lower cost, which is something we've already seen them execute successfully over and over again. And if you really break it down, despite all those departures, Seattle only lost one true starter on offense and one on defense, which is a key detail that completely changes how you evaluate these moves, because it's not about how many names left, it's about how much production actually walked out the door, and whether the team has viable replacements ready to step in. That's why the emergence of players like George Holani becomes even more important now, because there's a real expectation that he can step into a much larger role in the backfield and help offset the loss of Walker. And if that happens, then suddenly what looked like a major weakness could turn into just another example of Seattle's ability to reload instead of rebuild. And the same logic applies across the defense, where younger, cheaper players are expected to replicate or even exceed the production of those who left, which again ties back to the core identity of this team: find talent, develop talent, and then make disciplined decisions about who earns the big Ado Futhiu. contracts, and who gets replaced. Because, make no mistake, the Seahawks didn't avoid spending money because they couldn't. They did it because they're preparing for something much bigger. And that's where the future of this franchise really comes into focus, with massive extensions looming for Jaxon Smith-Njigba and Devin Witherspoon. And these aren't just good players we're talking about. These are foundational superstars. Smith-Njigba is trending toward being one of the highest-paid wide receivers in the entire league, and rightfully so given his trajectory, while Witherspoon is on track to become one of the top-paid defensive backs, possibly one of the very best at his position across the NFL. So when you connect all the dots, the decisions to let players like Woolen, Bryant, and Mayfield walk start to make a lot more sense, because Seattle is choosing to invest in elite game-changing talent rather than spreading money across very good players. And that's a strategy that, when executed correctly, keeps your championship window open much longer. And that's really the biggest takeaway from this entire offseason. This wasn't about making noise, it was about maintaining dominance, about setting up not just another playoff run, but potentially building a sustained run at the top of the NFL, and doing it in a way that avoids the pitfalls we've seen so many other contenders fall into. Because while other teams chase headlines, the Seahawks are building continuity, depth, and financial flexibility. And those three things combined are what turn great teams into dynasties. So as we head toward the 2026 season, the expectation isn't just that Seattle will be good again, it's that they'll be smarter, deeper, and in many ways more dangerous than the team that just won the Super Bowl, which is a scary thought for the rest of the league. Now I want to hear from you. If you're looking at this full picture, the players they kept, the ones they let go, and the future they're clearly planning for, do you believe the Seahawks actually improved their chances to repeat? Or did they take a step back in a way that could come back to haunt them? And if you want to stay on top of everything happening with the Seahawks, make sure you subscribe to the channel, drop a like on the video, and don't miss the next update because the latest news is already waiting for you right here. And you can click the video on your screen right now to keep following every move this team makes. Because if something big happens, you're going to hear it here first. Go Seahawks!